What's going on, guys? Illuminostic here. And it's true, as the thumbnail suggests, we are finally, after 4 years, leaving the Amazon. And it's not like it's permanent in the sense that I'll never be back, because where we're going near Cuzco, the jungle is still accessible with like a 2.5 hour trip. So, but we will not be living in the jungle for the first time in 4 years. And I had, kind of decided that I would never leave the jungle. Watching the world kind of burn and fall apart from out here in the Amazon, where there's fruit and food and fish and psychedelic plants everywhere and all the medicine you could ever need. It's kind of hard to imagine why you would leave. But things happen, and it's also true that my entire life since I was a child, I've felt called to Cusco and all of the sacred sites there, and I've always been fascinated by the ancient cultures, and I feel like there are secrets in the Andes that are still to be uncovered. I think there's a lot of lost knowledge that still exists here in the jungle and in the Andes, and that was honestly one of the pleasant surprises. It's really been a mixed bag in terms of disappointment and pleasant surprises. I definitely plan to talk a little bit about the things that I've learned since I've been here in the jungle. Obviously, I've drank, maybe a couple of gallons of ayahuasca since I've been here. I've seen plant medicine save lives. I have seen plant medicine take lives. I have had a lot of my suspicions about different capacities of consciousness that I always suspected were there, and that I had seen fleeting examples of resolutely confirmed by a lot of the experiences that I've had with shaman and my own experiences with these apparent entities. I've discovered that people definitely romanticize indigenous cultures to a large extent. And I have also discovered that a lot of them actually still do have the knowledge that has been passed down over the millennia regarding the medicines of the jungle and the shamanic traditions. Probably the most glaring problem with the ayahuasca industry has been the loss of this traditional knowledge and the replacement of it with sort of new agey pop culture sanctioned beliefs about what is traditional. The idea even of a collective ayahuasca ceremony is really mostly a modern convention. There's really no such thing. I've listened to people talk about how their maestro has been, his lineage has been serving the same dieta meal for 5,000 years of chicken and white rice. And of course, chicken have only been in this continent for 200 years and white rice for maybe 150. So, it's definitely problematic that that it's been commercialized and industrialized. At the same token, I just got back from a visit to a Ashaninka shamana named Dina. We did about an hour-long interview that we're in the process of translating and posting, and she is actually the first practitioner, I guess you could call her a curandera or shamana. I didn't think to ask what the Ashaninka word is for an ayahuasquero, but she is the first person that I have encountered in the 4 or 5 years that I've been here in the Amazon that actually practice the traditional way, which is to give the patient only a very tiny amount of ayahuasca, and the shaman actually drinks the bulk of the ayahuasca and does the healing through Icaro and energy work. And it, really just hit me talking to her that she was one of the last probably true shamans or shamanas that exist here, but at the same time, they are still here. It is still possible to find these people that are still practicing ayahuasca in the way that it has been practiced for thousands of years. And while we're on the subject, she was quite an extraordinary lady. She was very, very diminutive, very small. And when we landed the canoe on her island to go back to the farm, it was the worst cloud of mosquitoes that I have ever encountered in my life. I mean, they were so thick that you guys will see in the video. I show my arm when I get out of the canoe, and it's just completely blanketed. And luckily, that was only the problem like right around the edge of the lake in the darkness. Once you get into the jungle, into the more lit area around the jungle, it wasn't so bad. And then on the way back to her chakra, it's called, the farms, there were rows and rows and rows of like 7 or 8 foot tall chacruna plants for like 20 minutes of walking, just chacruna, 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 chacruna everywhere. I had a little bit of an opportunity to walk around with her, and she knew every single plant that, I would stop and notice a flower on the ground, and she would come over and say, yeah, this plant is used when women can't have babies, or, this plant is used, you have a rash, here, let me squeeze some of this bark from the caiperona tree and wipe it on your forehead and get rid of the rash. And she actually has fallen out of trees cutting ayahuasca twice. And she was probably close to 80. And one of them they said was a 40-meter fall. And I was like, wait a minute, that's not possible. She would be dead without a doubt. But they pointed out the tree and the broken branches that she crashed through on her way to the ground. And they took her to the hospital, and she said, no, get me out of here. She actually acts out the whole fall and everything flopping around on the ground in the video. It's a really great video. And by the way, you guys, we had to stay here to get these interviews for, an extra 10 days or something, because things kept getting delayed. We do all this out of pocket. We pay every single shaman or shamana that we interview. We have to pay the canoes to take us out in the jungle. And this is a demonetized channel. And now this trip to Cuzco, we're under or over our budget already. So we really appreciate those of you that have signed up for Patreon. And I would really encourage you guys out there that appreciate the work that we're doing, preserving ancient knowledge and supporting the people that are the stewards of that knowledge. So there are options in the chat and in the description for PayPal, Zelle, and Cash App. And we really, at this particular moment, are planning to go and try to set up a permanent institute for researching consciousness, not just with plant medicine, but also with the preservation of the Western mysteries and the Hermetic tradition, and modern technology. We're looking at a holistic integration of all of the systems that I've been studying for the last 35 years, and trying to put our roots down in a place where we have access to the jungle, but also the ability to escape the heat and the mosquitoes. And whatnot. So this is a great time to support this demonetized channel. We really, really do appreciate it. But what was I saying about, okay, so she fell out of the tree, smashed through all these limbs, and refused the hospital treatment. And she used plants to, she was paralyzed, she couldn't move her legs, to rebuild her spinal cord. And there are tons of witnesses to this. I mean, there are other people sitting around that were present through the whole thing. So she gets her spinal cord healed. She gets back to walking around on her own with her plants. And according to her, she was attacked by brujos, which are like dark shaman, because they were jealous. And she fell out of a tree again, only like 2 weeks after she healed the back injury. So apparently this was worse because she landed on like a log or something, and I guess the machete was like pinned like right underneath of her neck, which caused some other injuries. And the guys that were there said that her back was like completely, she was shaped like a question mark. And once again, she just used plants to straighten her back out. And then so about a week before that, we were sent to another shaman whose name is Augustino. and he is of the Shipibo lineage, and according to him, he is one of the last two Noya Rao shaman. Noya Rao is the tree of light. When the leaves fall from the tree, they glow, they bioluminesce. There are only 5 full-grown Noya Rao left in the jungle, supposedly. I've seen one. It was a pretty remarkable experience. I didn't know what I was looking at the time. It was the first time I'd been in the jungle, and I had drank ayahuasca, and I went out into the jungle to have this little experience with the... Yeah, can you please muzzle that animal? Yeah, I might as well tell you guys the story. This is one of the peaks of the experience of being in the Amazon, I guess. It was the first time I'd been into the jungle, definitely the first time I had ayahuasca in the jungle. And I was kind of called out into the jungle by Pachamama. And I guess I realized I had to use the bathroom. And so I was like, I don't want to go out into the jungle. No, that's how it started, right? The Pachamama's like, you need to go out into the jungle. It's like 3 a.m., it's like the third time I've drank ayahuasca. She's calling me out in the jungle alone, and I'm going, there's no way I'm going out in the Amazon rainforest at 3 a.m. on ayahuasca. Just not happening. And she's like, oh yeah? And suddenly I have like explosive diarrhea and have to clench up, and I'm like, oh no way. I'm not doing it, but that's where you're supposed to go to the bathroom. So I go out, walk down the stairs, and there's a tree. For some reason, I felt like I needed to stop and lean on the tree. And we had been fasting for 2 days because we were drinking in the Shuar way, and that's part of the preparation is that you don't eat and have very little water, and then you are exhausted all day walking around in the jungle where the mud is very thick and up and down mountainsides. And so, point being, I hadn't eaten anything in like 2 days at this point. And I'd vomit and vomit and vomit and vomit and vomit and vomit and vomit. And I was like, my God, where did you get that? Because it was, like gallons, and I've had nothing, not really even any water, a few sips of water. And Pachamama says, from the same place I got this. And then another, 5 gallons of vomit comes out. And as this is happening, there's like these trails of black, like negative trauma energy coming up with the vomit, and I would experience the trauma as it was happening kind of in fast forward as these trails passed through my mouth. Like the memory would flash through my head and like fast forward. And I actually paid attention to those traumas, and I noticed that my behavior did change in ways that suggested that I actually did just vomit it up and leave it there in the jungle. But so I went out into the jungle as I was instructed, and I actually said to her, in no way I'm gonna get bitten by a venomous snake or something. And she said, when was the last time you were bitten by a mosquito? And I realized that since I had been hearing her voice, I hadn't been touched by a single bug. And in Gualaquiza, the mosquitoes are wall to wall. So that was really something. And so I was like, all right, you got a point there. And then she made me have to go to the bathroom again, and so I had no choice and kept going. And I go out into the forest, and I see this log that has, it's only, this big around, and it has 30 different species of plant and a dozen different insects and just all of this life, all these lichens and fungus and beetles and ants and just so much stuff. And I look down at the forest floor, and everything's moving. And I'm like, oh man, and then I picture a bulldozer like rolling through, and I realize when you destroy just a couple of inches of this forest, there's, thousands and thousands, if not tens of thousands of life forms per inch or something, It's like more biodiversity per hectare than the entire state of Oklahoma. On average in the rainforest. And so I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, man, how can people possibly do that? And then I start getting instructions from the medicine to turn around and to, let go of any feelings of dissonance, fear or confusion or ego or, any of these interference patterns that disrupt your ability to be a hollow tube to draw down fire from heaven and get your work done. And so once I was completely clear, or along the way, all the animals in the jungle started kind of closing in on me. Like the sounds of the forest got closer and closer and closer. And I basically, when I got completely clear, I had this experience of being totally connected to everything in the entire jungle, to the extent that I would have a flash of a certain feeling, and then a certain animal would make a sound exactly corresponding to these little flashes of emotion and stuff. You know, the same animal connected to the same type of feeling. And, you know, that was just a really tremendous experience. But then it ended in kind of an embarrassing way, because I looked up into the mist, and there's this being that is coming floating down out of the mist, and it has one square eye, or one rectangular eye and one normal eye. And I recognized it as this like Aztec sun god. And it was obviously going to land like right face to face with me, and something was going to happen. But I totally abandoned everything I had just learned, which was to stay totally clear and calm. And I was like, you know what? I'm not playing along with this. I'm out of here. So I left without having this confrontation with this being. And so this is what I've been doing down here in the Amazon all these years, pretty much. Long story short. But that being, to tie this into Cuzco and this whole adventure, I feel like this whatever's going to happen in Cuzco feels like the culmination of my entire lifetime of pursuing what I call the invisible thread, of connecting all of these dots of, you know, shamanism and the hermetic occult sciences and all of this stuff. I feel like whatever is drawing me up into those ruins and up into the Andes, the point of it is to consolidate all of this. And I feel like that first real interaction with this sky god from ayahuasca, this sun god, it's something that is from those high Andean cultures. And I feel like, you know, I'm going to finish that confrontation with that being up there in the high Andes. Let me check in with the chat real quick. Yeah, well, you know, I mean, most of you guys know that for me, growing up as a white trash kid with, you know, no indoor plumbing and bullet holes in my window, in a neighborhood where if you called the cops, they often wouldn't come because they were so afraid of the neighbors who would shoot at them and throw bottles at them. One of my escapes, I think, was to watch documentaries about the Amazon rainforest, and to read books like One River by Wade Davis about the Amazon rainforest. And that all kind of catapulted my journey into my life's work, I guess. And so it was really a tremendous thing to find myself actually living here. One of the most extraordinary coincidences that I've ever experienced. One of the very early stories that I read before I mean, when I was a kid, I was probably 11 or 12 when I read One River by Wade Davis. There's a very famous story about a band of Warani that killed an entire plane load of missionaries because the plane came and landed, and they went in, and they, you know, of course, no one spoke Warani. Still to this day, very, very few outsiders speak Warani. They were leaving, these missionaries, and the Warani were giving them parrots and turtles and all of this stuff and saying, if you come back, we're going to kill you. Take these things with you and get out of here. And the missionaries misread that and thought that they meant that they liked them and that they should come back and teach them more about this Jesus fellow. And so they left, and it's crazy. I can't remember the guy's name, but this family of missionaries, their last name was something like Evangelist or something, like their real last name. It's one of those bits of evidence that there really is a universal mind that is writing these stories, because you just can't make this stuff up. And so they left for a while and they came back, and the story was that they dropped a photograph of the Warani that they took when they were leaving, and the Warani saw that, and they thought, these missionaries have come to trap our souls. Of course, the irony, in case it's lost on any of you guys out there, is that's exactly what those missionaries were there to do. And that was not lost on the Warani. And so when the plane landed, they killed everyone on the plane. A movie was made about it. I think it was called At the Tip or something like that. And so when we first came to the Amazon, we entered by way of a place called Shell, which was named after the oil company. And every day walking into town, we would walk past this plane that was kind of on this thing that looked like a spear, like stuck through the middle of it on the side of the road. And I always wondered, what the hell is that plane doing there? And a few months later, when we had finally landed at what would be the site of our first run of retreats, the lady that owned the property one day was talking to me. Oh, that's actually first I noticed a Warani lady in Misawali, right? So we were walking around town, and I saw this woman with a spear and the orange face paint, and I was like, that lady looks Warani. And so we go home, and I mention it to the lady. Yeah, I thought I saw a Warani woman there. And she said, oh, well, have you been through Shell? And I said, yeah. And she said, well, that plane is the plane from the movie, the story where the Warani killed all those missionaries. That's the plane they were killed on. And so she says that happened right there, like right across the river from the property where we were staying. So the bullet point of this presentation is basically that the story that originally got me fascinated with the Amazon, or at least one of the stories from that book, which I highly recommend to anyone, by the way. It's One River by Wade Davis. I've mentioned that a couple times already, I think. I ended up a stone's throw from where that story happened. That's where we landed accidentally when we came here to the Amazon, because we were supposed to meet with this Shuar shaman and go into the jungle, but he disappeared for a year and a half in the jungle. He did resurface eventually, but we missed him. And so I was like, well, let's just keep going and just see where we end up. And so we landed basically in the village of the people that had killed those missionaries from that story I read as a child. And I wonder what the odds of that happening. I didn't even know it was Ecuador. I always assumed it was Peru where that happened. So, learning about ayahuasca primarily from the Shuar, who that also is interestingly connected to my childhood, because when I was little, really little, like 7 or younger maybe even, we lived near Washington, D.C., and we would go to the Smithsonian Institute, and they had actual sansas, the shrunken heads. And the story with the shrunken heads is that ayahuasca taught them to do this. So this is another one of those instances where the pop culture narrative about what ayahuasca is for kind of falls apart, because a lot of people kind of paint it like ayahuasca is trying to teach everyone to be like vegan and love everyone and stuff. And that's not true. Ayahuasca, I think, adapts you to your environment, whatever is the best type of behavior. It helps you to fully realize yourself and to adapt to your environment, whatever that is. So if your environment happens to be an environment where people might come and spear you and your family at any moment, it's only going to make you scarier. So the Shuar, who, by the way, were never conquered. They were never conquered by the Inca. They were never conquered by conquistadors. Eventually, they were conquered by missionaries, and they are overwhelmingly Catholic now, which I find to be one of the most offensive tragedies in human history. that this religion has managed to infiltrate all of these cultures and usurp their beliefs and destroy their spirits. And it's really, really a shame that Catholicism exists, much less that it found its way here into the Amazon. But the Shuar would remove the heads of their enemies and then take the skin off the skull and then shrink the skull and the skin separately using a combination of heat and water and minerals and plants, certain plants. In fact, the Shuar are considered to have the second best knowledge of the plants of the rainforest, second only to the Shipibo. So they have very extensive knowledge. In fact, one of the things that they can do, there's a plant here that looks like the skin of a Dos Equis. And if a Dos Equis bites you, your chances of actually getting to the hospital are not very good. But if you do, the chances of amputation are nearly 100%. There was a girl in Colombia a few years ago that was bitten on the leg in the city. So they were right next to the hospital, and she still lost her leg. So it's arguably more toxic than the taipan. There's some contention about whether the most venomous snake in the world is in Australia, the taipan, or here, the Dos Equis. But it's common knowledge that the Shuar have the secret combination of plants that will cure the snake bite to the extent that you will not require amputation. And the hospital, it's like 90% or something. But they're very secretive about that. No one knows outside of a certain select group of Shuar. They consider this plant knowledge to be very, it's almost like Freemasonry, where you have degrees and you have secrecy. And only the smartest kids and the most trustworthy and honorable are selected to get the full, and I'm not talking about shaman, the Ushuin. I'm talking about just the medical knowledge of the plants. It's not even just guarded by the tribe. Only certain people in the tribe have this level of knowledge. But anyways, so they say ayahuasca taught them to do this, and they remove the skin and the skull, and they shrink it, and then they put it back together, and they sew the eyes, nose, mouth, all of the orifices closed to trap the soul of the enemy in the heads, and so in the skull. Pretty wild to try to imagine drinking ayahuasca and then taking the skin off of a skull and Jesus. But that's the story. And so, yeah, that was really my first real connection with the indigenous tribes of South America, is going to the Smithsonian and seeing those shrunken heads. And I remember asking my dad, are those real? Wait, that's a head? I mean, they're only this big, and the skull is in there. It's all shrunk. Pretty insane. The hair stays the same length, so they would tie them on their belts and run around. And I mean, you can imagine they probably avoided a lot of violence, because when you saw these guys come running up with skulls and their necklaces and heads hanging around their belts and stuff, you just okay, you win, no need to fight. But yeah, so I ended up primarily working with them in the early days with a shaman that worked with them, and then eventually with his teacher. So that was a really remarkable thing, to find myself sitting around a fire in the jungle with these head shrinking indigenous people after growing up with this fascination and seeing those heads in the Smithsonian. And by the way, let this all be a lesson to you that you have no excuses not to go out and really live your life. Because I've done all this with no resources. I was sick much of the time. In fact, my lifespan has probably been reduced, which, there's always drawbacks. There's always a silver lining, or a gray, what's that Grateful Dead line? Every silver lining has a touch of gray. That's it. Every silver lining has a touch of gray. So I was bitten on the lip by a kissing bug a few years ago. And the consequence of that can be something called Chagas disease. And it was an absolute nightmare. It was one of the worst things that I've ever been through. I knew it hurt so bad. Like, it swelled up and got really hard and like rock hard. And I had a single client coming for a retreat, and I got a fever, and I was, unable to sleep, and the pain was excruciating. I was just so weak. And I knew I was really in trouble one day when I went outside to pee in the middle of the night, and I just passed out face first into the rocks that I had just peed on. And that really let me know that this was no joke. And the pain was not just in my lip. I mean, just full body, just blazing crazy. And so I was living with the Quechua shaman. At that point, I had been studying the plants in the jungle for many years. And so I knew, basically what to do to go get cascarilla and chuchawasi and, Dr. Sandi and all of these different plants and mix them together and drink them. Ayahuasca, of course, always is a great foundation for all of these other medicines because, from a shamanic point of view, they say it basically opens you up so that you're more, the more subtle connection can be made with these other plants, and so they're better able to help you, increases their efficacy. And then also ayahuasca on its own is a really good anti-inflammatory. So anyways, I used all of those plants and some others that were suggested by the shaman. And by the time I actually went and got a test for Chagas, I only had antibodies that were below the positive level, but it meant that I had come into contact with it. So what that very strongly suggests is that I was infected, and I was able to basically reverse or neutralize the parasites, is really what it is. But not before they had done probably enough damage to my heart that they say once you've contracted it, basically you have 3 to 10 years to live, and then eventually you'll just have a heart attack. So that's really crazy to think that, that was about 2 years ago. And it's true that since then I've had pretty severe chest pains on a lot of nights and under high stress circumstances. So that's another reason that I'm really pushing to get up to Cuzco and get this final round of retreats done. That's another thing, you guys. We are definitely going to have one more event when we get to Cuzco, and we're looking for either a partner, or early bird investor, or someone who wants to make a deposit, an early deposit, in exchange for a really good deal. And exactly what that looks like is highly flexible. So you can contact me if you're into that. Basically, what we're going to do is set up somewhere around Cuzco, probably Pisac, and then it's only about 2 hours to the jungle. So we will focus on hermetic, mystery school type knowledge, and then we will also invite some of the local Andean medicine men of various stripes. We have some connections down there with some really interesting and reputable people, so we'll invite different shaman over for huachuma, for San Pedro, and coca and ambil, and some of these other Andean medicines. And then we will journey down into the rainforest. And what we'll probably do is have like a 6-week program. And you can come for 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 6 weeks, whatever. But we're going to make 3 different treks to 3 different areas of the jungle that are completely different. What is the word? Micro climates or environments or whatever. I'm sorry, the language is escaping me at the moment, but that's the plan. So if you come for the whole thing, you'll go to all 3 jungle treks. And then the upside of being up in the Andes, part of it is that you'll be able to escape from the heat and the bugs of the jungle between these excursions down to have ayahuasca and to check out these different areas of the rainforest. So it's guaranteed that it's going to be amazing. And if you haven't, if you're not familiar with like the Pisac, Cusco area, look it up. There's all sorts of amazing like bright blue, giant mountaintop lakes and ruins all over the place. The Nazca lines aren't too far, I think, and for sure Machu Picchu is there. So probably in the middle of the event, we'll all go to Machu Picchu. And yeah, so pretty exciting. Just have to get there and get the ball rolling, and hopefully we're going to have some guests from prior retreats, so there'll be an element of sort of reunion happening there. One thing that I should mention before I bail on this stream I think I'm already late for the music stream I was going to do. I should probably jump on over here and make it for 20 minutes later and give myself a few more minutes to wrap this up. But something to consider, you guys, the estimate for the complete destruction of the rainforest to the degree that it will be comparable to the Sahara Desert is only the 2030s currently. So, if you haven't seen the rainforest, you need to do that because you don't have all the time in the world. It's just a sad fact that we're probably not going to be able to turn this ship around in time. And beyond that, I have watched the insect life vanish over just the last 3 years. So when I got here, this was more in Ecuador. Everything seems a little bit more, I think the waterways are so much bigger, and it probably takes more to concentrate the pollutants. That's my theory, but it seems like Peru still has enough mosquitoes and shit. But in Ecuador, I watched the clouds of bugs go from you couldn't see through them around lights at night, to almost nothing. I posted a short you guys can check out where I went outside and walked through these lights, and it's, there's nothing there. And the fish are vanishing from the rivers. So I'm not just trying to sound the alarm bells, but it's also, I think, really helpful to get involved with conservation in some way, shape, or form if you are at all able. I think it's definitely one of the most worthy causes on earth. I know we all have our fair share of problems and financial difficulties at the moment, but the Amazon rainforest is one of our great treasures on this planet, and watching it vanish is not a lot of fun. It's actually pretty terrifying. Yeah, Peru is also much larger. I think that probably has... and there's less cities. The cities aren't as close together. There's Lima, and then there's just nothing. It's all just country. It's definitely very Wild West here compared to Ecuador. Ecuador has a much more sort of domesticated energy. The people are a lot more formal and kind of uptight, and there's a lot of cops around in a lot of places. Although, I was going to talk about some of the things I learned from living in the Amazon, and one of those things is definitely that we don't need all the things that we think we do. But that's I think everyone's kind of figuring that out. I don't know that you need to go and hide in the jungle in order to understand that. But, and this was true in the United States. Before I came here, I lived in communities that had no cops. We self-regulated, and it was very effective because, there were certain rules, and the consequences for overstepping certain boundaries were so severe, no one did it, really. Occasionally somebody would come up from the city and do something stupid, and then there would be a problem. But for the most part, the locals behaved themselves because they knew. So I saw that before I left the United States, that people are definitely capable of anarchy. And then coming here to South America, when we lived in Misawali, there were no cops, and there was no serious crime. There were no murders, no rape, no grand larceny, and there's nothing there to protect you. There's no one to call if there's a problem, and yet. So I think one of the most important lessons that I've learned from being in South America in general, I think, is that it is the culture in the United States and Europe and other places where society is steeply in decline, where the prisons are full, where people are scared of each other, where materialism reigns supreme. It's the culture, it's not people. And another interesting observation I've made is that the further away from civilization you get, the less problems there are. So the indigenous communities that are right around the borders of the towns, there tends to be rampant alcoholism, domestic abuse, all sorts of, unpleasant realities. And poverty is the same, but it hits different. When you're closer to the cities and you see the poverty, it looks more like hellish poverty. When you get way out into the jungle, people don't have any more money, but their stuff is clean, the stores are more nicely organized, people aren't drunk everywhere, they're friendlier, and it's like the further you get away from Babylon Matrix, the healthier people are, and the more intact the cultures are, and the less alcoholism there is. I even noticed that as we got further away from civilization, the moonshine got weaker and weaker and weaker until it's just like wine, and almost no one drinks it anyways. So that was a remarkable observation to make, something that I would have suspected, but it was nice to have it confirmed. Something else along those lines. Oh, and then also the fact of the efficacy of ayahuasca to maintain healthy communities and to, really just to maintain healthy communities. The indigenous communities that have really become detached from those roots and their connection with their ancestral medicines have a lot of alcoholism and a lot of problems. But if you go out to the Shipibo communities where people start giving the children even small amounts of ayahuasca when they're very small and increasing it as they get older, there is no alcoholism. People seem very balanced and open and uncomplicated. And, I guess it's got to be the ayahuasca. I mean, I don't see any other explanation. And to bolster that opinion, there was at least one study that was done on ayahuasca using youth in Brazil, and they scored better in every single category. The ayahuasca using adolescents, so between the ages of 12 and 16, they were less inclined to violence. They didn't use drugs and alcohol. They scored higher on IQ tests and generally did better in school than the people that did not use ayahuasca. So important lessons. Yeah, so I guess I'm going to pop over to my other stream and play some music. I want to thank all of you guys for your support over the years. I want to encourage you to come and visit us in Cuzco, and ask everyone if you are inclined to join our Patreon. We really appreciate your support. This journey to Cuzco, we are definitely underfunded for that, and it's very important. And of course, along the way, if I meet shamans in the mountains on the road where we're going, I have to pay them all to get interviews and stuff. So when you guys contribute to our channel, that's what you're supporting. And it's difficult for us to do it without your support. So there are ways to support us one time in the chat, And if you join the Patreon, you can join our secret streams and some other perks. You can also join my Discord and become part of the community that way. It's also worthy of note that a lot of people in the Patreon have gotten to know each other, so where there's actually like meaningful relationships and actual community of substance that is forming out of this, and I am eternally grateful for that. That's a very important aspect of what I'm doing here. I think that even though we are facing a global chaostrophe of unparalleled and unmeasurable magnitude, because we have elements of such tremendous scope that it's even difficult to sort of imagine what the impact is going to be. And of course, I think we're all becoming acutely aware that we have allowed this monstrous machine to develop itself to the point where it's nearly impenetrable. And so I think a lot of hope and faith that we had in the early 2000s and in the 1960s, it's difficult to maintain optimism in the face of such tremendous adversity and uncertainty. But we, still must play a role. We have to compartmentalize, and we have nothing better to do than to try to continue to reach our own individual highest potential and to encourage that development in each other and to come together in community and pool ideas and resources and prepare for the worst and hope for the best, and the rest is written. So thank you again, everyone. Please do send support and join the Patreon. And I will see you guys again pretty soon. I'm going to try to stream. We're having some trouble with our internet provider for our phones. I don't really know what's going on. But hopefully we can get it fixed in the next couple of days, and I'll be able to stream from the road. Otherwise, I have a couple of videos that are scheduled to post automatically over the next week or so there will still be some content. So appreciate everyone, and I'll see you again very, very soon.